In this lecture, we're going to talk about something that has been a very important theme in Middle Eastern history, interreligious relations, and it's something that continues to be very important. As of the recording of this audio, which is summer 2014, there's a terrorist network, ISIS, which has taken control of much of Syria and has moved through northern Iraq. One of the cities that's come under its grip is Mosul, which used to have one of the most ancient Christian populations in the world, dating back, some would argue, to basically the beginning of Christianity. Now the city has been almost completely depleted of its Christian population. With stories like this in the news, a casual observer might conclude, well, Islam is tolerant of other religions. That's an overly simplistic way to look at it because one terrorist network isn't representative of 1.8 billion people, but there's also a very complicated historical interplay that we'll try to do our best to dive into. In short, Muslim treatment of Christians and Jewish subjects has been a mixed bag in history. Although Muslims didn't give anything like a free expression of religion, in the Middle Ages, arguably a Christian or Jew had a much better life under a Muslim ruler than vice versa in Europe. So hopefully after this lesson, you'll understand how to make sense of the rights of religious minorities today by understanding their situation in the past. I want to reference one other event that happened a few years ago that might help frame this. In April 2011, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which is an umbrella group for 57 Muslim nations, issued a report which said that the incitement of religious hatred be criminalized. It recommended this. The report named no mention of Christianity and Judaism, but it singled out Islam as a unique recipient of long-standing religious discrimination. They cited such events as the 2006 Danish cartoons, or in 2011 when American pastor Terry Jones threatened to burn a Quran. And they also mentioned that Muslim immigrants in Europe had come under discrimination in society and had been barred access to certain leadership positions in government. They and other Muslim rights groups have claimed that Muslims have always treated other religions with respect. However, many people disagree with this assessment. Perhaps one of the strongest critics is Robert Spencer, who's written many books against the contents of the Quran and what he believes to be fascist elements within Islam. And he has said that throughout history, Islam has been the one to impose itself in a totalitarian fashion onto other religions. He and other critics assert that wherever Islam is spread, it makes free worship for other religions impossible. So between these two, which is correct? These are obviously two polar extremes, so obviously they won't do to explain the complexities of history. So let's dive in and get a better understanding of how religious minorities fared in Muslim states and Muslim empires. First, just some background. I briefly mentioned the Pact of Umar. In 717 AD, the Umayyad Caliph Omar II issued a mandate to Christians living on conquered lands. He said they could choose to convert to Islam, pay a poll tax, or be killed. Christians were also routinely enslaved and subjected to the confiscation of their property. In Islamic courts, their testimony would only be worth a fraction of a Muslim's, and the permission to build new churches or synagogues was dependent on the generosity of a Muslim ruler at the time. It was a very common practice that when a Muslim state conquered a Christian one, it would take the principal church of the city and immediately convert it into a mosque. Sometimes the symbolic act occurred where the church bell would be turned upside down and filled with water, and that would be used for the ritual cleansings of hands before the 5 daily prayers that occur at a mosque. But other times in history, Christians and Jews enjoyed better lives under Muslim rulers than vice versa. Sometimes Christians even enjoyed better rule than other Christians. We mentioned in the last lesson that when the Ottoman Empire was conquering the Balkans in the 1300s, there were many Eastern Orthodox Christians that preferred to be under Muslim rule than under Catholic rule, which stands to make sense because one Christian ruler might be compelled to make other Christians adhere to their particular denominational flavors. But for the most part, for a Muslim ruler, they didn't really care what Christians believed or practiced. It didn't matter to a Muslim ruler whether one was Orthodox or Catholic or later Protestant. What mattered was that you were a good subject who didn't rebel and paid your taxes on time. And keep in mind that these events occur in the Middle Ages. This is a time when no one had the Jeffersonian idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if you take it in historical context, it is noteworthy that in Muslim states, Christians and Jews did have a social space carved out for them. It meant that within Islamic law, Christians and Jews were understood as people of the book, and as long as they paid a poll tax called a jizya, then they were free to worship as they pleased and were even offered the protection of the Muslim ruler. There's not a well-developed body of Christian law in the same way as Islamic law, but all that to say, in medieval Europe, the social spaces carved out for Muslims and Jews wasn't quite as well defined. The Muslims that came under Spanish rule in the 13 and 1400s, after the Reconquista finished, at some point were told to leave in 1492 or convert to Christianity. Jews faced the same dilemma. However, there were many Jews that did fare better in different parts of Europe, and when they were kicked out of Spain, many went to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So some Jews enjoyed prosperity in medieval Europe, others faced outright persecution, and a similar thing is happening in the Middle Ages. Like I said, throughout much of its history, most Muslim leaders were far less interested in harassing their non-Muslim subjects than collecting their tax money. For example, the Ottoman Empire's economy mostly depended on the collection of a non-Muslim poll tax. When Ottoman Sultan Selim I, who reigned in the early 1500s, wanted to convert all of his Christian subjects of the empire to Islam, his advisors ruled out the idea. They reminded him that a majority of the revenue came from the Christian poll tax. And like I said, after the late 1400s, when Jews left Spain after the Spanish Inquisition, many of them made their way for the Ottoman Empire, where they were well received. Some of their descendants still live in Turkey, and in some parts of Istanbul, you can hear the Ladino language, which is a Hebrew-inflected form of Spanish. So going over these things, non-Muslims were not mandated to convert to Islam. Okay, so that's the historical context, but when we talk about today, what are the rights of Christians and Jews in Muslim countries? Well, suffice it to say that in the modern era, Muslim nations have generally established a poor track record of protecting religious minorities. In a 2013 Religious Freedom Report, it ranked nearly all Muslim countries as partly free or unfree. Attempted Muslim terrorist attacks in the United States and Europe are often accompanied by statements from the attacker who justify their actions by commands from the Quran, demanding all Muslims to engage in holy war against non-Muslims. This was framed most clearly in 1998 when Osama bin Laden declared an open-ended jihad against the entire Western world, which became the rallying cry for al-Qaeda. In response to these trends, Christians and Jews in the Middle East have engaged in a mass exodus from Muslim-dominated countries for decades. I talked about Christians in Iraq leaving Mosul, and to give an idea of what their situation has been, before the first Gulf War in the early 1990s, there were approximately 1 million Christians in Iraq. They were Eastern Catholic, Orthodox, Nestorian. Today, that number has dropped to about 400,000 to 300,000 and will probably continue to dip lower. There's been a massive exodus of Middle Eastern Christians out of the Middle East who are part of historical communities that extend back centuries because with the political chaos there, oftentimes Christians are targeted unfairly in violence and they don't have the means to defend themselves with militias and the way that Sunni militias or Sunni groups or Shia groups might be able to. Yet, as is often the case, the historical record is more diverse and complex than just simple current events like these suggest. Muslim immigration to Europe and America increases each year. There's approximately 50 million Muslims living in Europe, And according to some recent accounts, the Muslim population has surpassed the Jewish population in America. So the issue of intercultural and interreligious harmony and how to integrate Muslims into Western society, and also how to deal with Christians and Jews in Eastern society and Middle Eastern society is a major issue and very controversial amongst the political class today. All that to say, hopefully there are lessons about interreligious harmony that can be taken in the past to understand how different beliefs could be accommodated. So in the next lecture, what we're going to talk about is a very important and influential figure within Middle Eastern history, which is Genghis Khan. And interestingly enough, although he has a reputation as a very brutal ruler, he actually accommodated a lot of faith systems as well. So we're going to talk about that in the next lecture. Thanks for listening.